How does a man go from being a world-renowned motivational speaker, appearing in the blockbuster hit The Secret, to standing trial for the deaths of his followers? This is the story of James Arthur Ray, a figure who went from promising people the secrets to success and happiness to leaving a trail of tragedy and scandal in his wake. Ray once inspired millions with his teaching on the law of attraction, convincing his audience that they could manifest their wildest dreams. But as his message grew more extreme, so did his methods, ultimately leading to a disaster that shook the self-help industry to its core. Today, I'm talking about the rise and fall of James Arthur Ray, how he skyrocketed to fame in the self-help world, what really happened at his infamous Arizona retreats, and where he stands now. And the biggest question of all, can someone who has been at the center of such tragedy ever make a comeback? Before the fame, controversy, and legal battles, James Arthur Ray had humble beginnings. Born in 1957 in Oklahoma, Ray was raised in a deeply religious family, where his father was a preacher. This early exposure to faith and spirituality shaped much of Ray's philosophy later in life, blending traditional religious beliefs with New Age concepts that would eventually make him a star in the self-help industry. In the late 1980s, Ray started his career as a motivational speaker. Like many in the industry, his early work centered on leadership training and corporate consulting. However, he soon realized that people were searching for something deeper, answers to life's big questions about success, happiness, and fulfillment. He began incorporating elements of psychology, spirituality, and metaphysics into his teachings, setting him apart from other self-help figures of the time. In 2006, James Arthur Ray found himself on the brink of mainstream fame thanks to his appearance in The Secret, a film and book that took the world by storm. The Secret introduced the concept of the law of attraction, the idea that positive thinking and focused intent could manifest desired outcomes in life. Ray, who was already a rising star in the self-help world, was perfectly positioned to capitalize on this message, and his role in the film shot him straight into the spotlight. In the movie, Ray appeared alongside other well-known motivational figures, all advocating the same idea, that you could think your way to success, wealth, and happiness. Ray, however, took it a step further by blending this philosophy with his own teachings on spiritual empowerment, promising followers not just material wealth, but deeper spiritual fulfillment. His presence in The Secret was magnetic, and he stood out as one of the most polished, charismatic voices in the movement. For Ray, The Secret was more than just a film. It was a massive promotional tool that legitimized his growing empire. His seminars grew larger and more elaborate, often boasting high ticket prices and the promises of life-changing experiences. However, as Ray's influence grew, so did the intensity of his teachings. What started as simple motivational seminars evolved into more extreme programs. And this shift, while attracting a dedicated following, would soon lead him down a much darker path, one that would challenge the very foundation of his message. James Arthur Ray's seminars evolved into what he called spiritual warrior training, promising personal empowerment, but at significant financial and physical costs. Ray's events became mentally and physically grueling, with participants enduring fasting, sleep deprivation, and strenuous physical challenges. His philosophy shifted from self-improvement to a survival of the fittest mentality, leading critics to accuse him of pushing vulnerable attendees beyond their limits. One of his most controversial practices involved endurance tests that pushed participants to exhaustion, raising concerns about the emotional and physical toll. Former followers spoke out about the manipulation and cult-like authority Ray exerted, convincing attendees that suffering was necessary for enlightenment. Despite these warnings, his popularity grew, with participants paying thousands for the promise of spiritual breakthroughs. By 2009, James Arthur Ray had built a reputation for pushing his followers to their physical and mental limits, but nothing could have prepared them for what was about to unfold at his infamous spiritual warrior retreat in Sedona, Arizona. Marketed as the ultimate test of spiritual endurance, this retreat was designed to take participants through challenges that Ray promised would lead to profound personal breakthroughs. The retreat, held in the Arizona desert, was a 5-day event that attracted participants willing to pay thousands of dollars for what they believed would be a life-changing experience. Ray had successfully branded these retreats as transformative journeys, where attendees could conquer their fear and limitations, often through extreme physical and emotional challenges. But it was the sweat lodge exercise on the final day that would become the center of a devastating tragedy. The sweat lodge, a structure traditionally used by Native American cultures for spiritual practices, was central to the final phase of Ray's retreat. Participants entered a tightly packed dome-shaped tent where they were exposed to extreme heat for hours. Ray instructed them to endure the conditions as part of their spiritual journey, urging them to push through their discomfort and embrace the challenge. He presented the sweat lodge as a metaphor for overcoming life's obstacles. If you could survive the heat, you could survive anything. However, what Ray did not consider, or chose to ignore, was the real danger that the extreme heat posed to the participants. The makeshift sweat lodge was overcrowded and poorly ventilated, with temperatures inside reaching unbearable levels. Participants began to collapse and lose consciousness as the heat became too much to bear. Ray, however, continued to encourage them to stay inside, insisting that their discomfort was part of the transformation process. Tragically, by the end of the ceremony, 3 people had died from heat stroke and several others were hospitalized. Kirby Brown, James Shore, and Liz Newman lost their lives after spending hours in the sweltering heat, while other participants suffered long-term physical and psychological effects. The media quickly descended on Sedona, and Ray, who had once been hailed as a guru of personal transformation, now found himself at the center of a scandal. The tragedy at the Arizona retreat raised serious questions about Ray's practices and his responsibility as a leader. Critics argued that Ray had created a dangerous environment where participants felt pressured to ignore their own physical limits in order to achieve what he promised would be a spiritual breakthrough. They accused him of recklessly endangering lives in pursuit of profit and power, pointing out that there were no safety measures in place, no medical professionals on hand, and no clear way for participants to leave the sweat lodge if they became overwhelmed. Ray's defense was that the participants were all adults who had willingly signed up for the experience, fully aware of the risks involved. However, this argument did little to calm the outrage that followed the incident. Families of the victims sued Ray, and authorities launched an investigation into the events that transpired at the retreat. The Sedona Sweat Lodge tragedy would forever tarnish Ray's career and reputation, and it marked the beginning of a long legal battle that would see him face manslaughter charges. The tragedy at the Sedona retreat not only led to widespread public outrage, but also triggered a series of legal actions against James Arthur Ray. Families of the victims, along with survivors, sought justice for the lives lost and the trauma endured. The primary accusation was that Ray had recklessly endangered participants' lives by creating dangerous conditions in the sweat lodge without proper safety measures or medical personnel on hand. In 2010, Ray was formally charged with 3 counts of manslaughter for the deaths of Kirby Brown, James Shore, and Liz Newman. The prosecution argued that Ray had ignored repeated warnings about the conditions inside the sweat lodge and had failed to act as participants became ill. Witnesses testified that Ray had pushed people to stay inside the sweltering heat, dismissing their pleas for help as weaknesses they needed to overcome. The defense, on the other hand, maintained that the participants had willingly joined the event, understanding the risks involved. Ray's legal team claimed that the deaths were tragic accidents, not the result of criminal negligence. They argued that the participants were all adults who had signed waivers and had the freedom to leave at any time, suggesting that Ray could not be held solely responsible for the outcomes. The trial was highly publicized, drawing attention from media outlets around the world. Former followers of Ray, as well as experts in the self-help industry, weighed in on the case, with some calling it a wake-up call for the dangers of charismatic leaders who wield too much power over their followers. Ray's critics pointed out that his methods had grown increasingly reckless in the years leading up to the incident, with a growing focus on pushing people past their physical and emotional limits. Some witnesses recalled how Ray had seemed to take pride in pushing boundaries, framing it as a necessary step towards change. In June 2011, after months of emotional testimony from both sides, the jury found Ray guilty of negligent homicide, a lesser charge than manslaughter. He was sentenced to 2 years in prison, a decision that many viewed as too lenient given the loss of life. Ray ultimately only served 20 months before being released on parole. The fallout from the trial was significant, not just for Ray, but for the broader self-help industry. The tragedy and subsequent legal proceedings sparked a wider conversation about the ethical responsibility of motivational speakers and life coaches, particularly those who push their followers to extreme measures. Many questioned the lack of regulation in the industry and the dangers of unchecked power in the hands of individuals like Ray. In the aftermath, some of Ray's contemporaries distanced themselves from him, while others called for greater oversight in the field of self-help. For the families of Kirby, James, and Liz, the trial and Ray's prison sentence brought little closure. In interviews, they expressed frustration with the legal outcome, arguing that Ray's sentence did not reflect the gravity of his actions. He took 3 lives, Kirby Brown's mother said in an interview. 2 years in prison is not justice. After serving his prison sentence and being released on parole in 2013, James Arthur Ray faced the challenge of rebuilding his life and career. Once celebrated in the self-help industry, his involvement in the deaths of 3 people made him a controversial figure. Despite the backlash, Ray has attempted a comeback in motivational speaking. Since his release, he has rebranded his prison time as a dark night of the soul, claiming that the experience made him better equipped to guide others through adversity. He references his time in prison as a period of reflection and uses it as a key part of his message in new seminars, workshops, and books, focusing on resilience and overcoming failure. In 2016, Ray appeared in the documentary Enlighten Us, which reignited debate over whether he should still have a platform. Some former followers have welcomed his return, but the families of those who died, particularly Kirby Brown's, argue that Ray has not shown genuine remorse and is more concerned with his image than accountability. His story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of charismatic leadership in the self-help industry, reminding us that personal growth should never come at the cost of safety or integrity. James Arthur Ray's story highlights the dangers of unchecked power, charisma, and the lengths that people will go to in the search for personal growth. From his meteoric rise as a motivational speaker and his appearance in The Secret to the devastating tragedy in Sedona, Ray's journey reminds us that ambition, when taken too far, can lead to dire consequences. The lives lost at his Arizona retreat were not just participants in a self-help seminar. They were people with families, dreams, and hopes for a better future. Their stories deserve to be remembered, as do the lessons we've learned from this tragedy, that the pursuit of self-improvement should never come at the expense of human life, and that leaders in any field must be held accountable for the impact they have on those who follow them. I'm interested to know your thoughts in the comments. Do you think someone like James Arthur Ray should be given a second chance? Thanks for watching, and stay safe on your own journey of personal growth.